can survive a drought, you can work through low commodity prices, but what do you do when the toughest part of farming is the family you're working with? Well, this is a show we're calling Surviving the Family Farm. We're going to talk about the challenges, the day-to-day challenges of working with family when it comes to relationships, some of those unspoken family tensions, and the planning that sometimes never happens or doesn't happen near soon enough. I'm Bryce Doeschot, pleased to be joined by three experts in this space. We'll start down on the far end of the table. That is Dr. Tom Field. He's a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, director of the Angler Agribusiness Entrepreneurship Program at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Next to him, Craig Burnside, farm succession consultant, former pastor. Got to get into that here in a little bit to blend strategic thinking with a lot of empathy. Appreciate both of you being here. And then on my left here, Spencer Hartman, an attorney with Rembo Ludke and a fifth-generation farmer, grew up near Imperial, Nebraska. So, gentlemen, we're going to get right into the questions, dive a little bit deeper into your backgrounds as we go through today's program. Our first question comes from Tom in Southwest Nebraska. Tom writes in, he says, "We've leased a section of pasture to the same neighbor for years. No contract, just a handshake like we've always done. Now we find he's been subleasing part of that pasture out without ever talking to us. More cattle, more pressure on grass, and he's doing it zero maintenance, all while that's happening. He asked, do we have any legal standing without a written lease? And then part two of that question, how do you protect yourself when a handshake deal starts to fall apart? Spencer, first on the legal front, what are his options?
Sure. So I like to tell clients all the time that there's a major difference between having a legal right and enforcing your legal right. So we could get down into the weeds of what is the legalities around the fine print of this. But my opinion is on something like this, the barrier to enforcement is probably so high that it's better to take the good handshake approach to this and figure it out. Maybe one other thought I have on this is, for a long time, agriculture particularly has been running on handshake deals. And now these are multi-million-dollar enterprises. And so if we took the same philosophy and applied it to any other sector of the economy, so if you owned a commercial building and you were going to lease that out, you wouldn't think for a second about doing that on an oral lease. And my thought is there's some applicability for running our agricultural enterprises like the multi-million-dollar businesses that they are, and probably should look to getting to a written lease in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom, Craig, a lot of agriculture still is on that handshake approach. Is a written contract the way to go moving forward, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's easy to think like, well, in the moment now we have a mess, but prevention, which is almost always secured through really effective communication. I think every entity, if you sit down maybe annually, maybe every 6 months and just ask for an hour, get the team around the table and say, okay, what are our biggest assumptions? And which of these assumptions, if they're wrong, create a lot of hassle for us or create heartache even. And then you identify those, prioritize them, and the ones that where you have the biggest risk, you better be contracted. And at the very least, scheduled communication, which let's just be really honest, and I are one, so I can say this. In agriculture, men are not the greatest communicators on the planet. And that's usually the downfall. I think you can make handshake deals work in some situations, but if you do that sans communication, you're just setting yourself up for a bad day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to say, I think here there's a little bit of a carrot and a stick in the economics of it. The deadline is September 1st on oral leases, and so this tenant, under the law, has rights to that land until October 30th of 2026. That doesn't mean you can't have the conversation now. And the carrot and stick on that is, we've enjoyed this great relationship for so many years, and we want to see that continue. Here's our concerns. What can we do about it? If we can't get together on it, probably not going to be able to keep working together moving forward.
We open up with you, Spencer. Let's learn a little bit more about you. I mentioned you're attorney with Rembo Ludke in Lincoln, Nebraska. Grew up in Imperial, though. What made you want to go into ag law?
Oh, that's a great question.
You probably get asked that all the time.
I came through undergrad and was very involved on campus. Got to the end of my senior year, and the rubber was hitting the road about what do I want to do next. And I thought about, I was ag economics, emphasis in public policy. And I had thought about a master's degree. I'd thought about doing policy work. The only thing worse than a lawyer is a lobbyist. And I had thought about, I'd been involved in some real estate investments and livestock, and ultimately ended up working for the State Department of Economic Development for a year, which learned a lot, made a lot of connections, but that solidified for me that I wanted to go to law school. I had a passion for agriculture, for people, for families. I was connected in the entrepreneurship community, and I had a lot of friends who were starting and growing businesses. And so for me, it was a natural fit to work in this space where a lot of our estate planning clients have real estate. Real estate clients need estate plans. Business was growing. And for me, and just the way I was networked, it was a natural evolution of being able to work with people who were either coming back to family farms or were having kids of their own and growing, starting businesses. It was a natural fit, and almost 5 years later in practice, it still feels great. I love it every day.
Very good. All right, well, let's get to our next question. Excited about this one. Julie wrote in from Southeast Iowa. She says, my husband and I are in our early 60s. We built a row crop operation our whole lives, but most of our net worth is now tied up in land and equipment, not savings. We've got 3 kids. One of them farms full-time. One helps out during the harvest, the busy seasons, and one lives out of the state, not connected to the farm. Julie says they want to pass the farm on, but what does fair look like when their involvement is not equal? And how do we start this conversation without creating tension or hurt feelings? Tom, I want to start with you on this question. I'm sure you've talked with a lot of people about what fair looks like.
Well, the key thing is they've recognized that fair and equal are not the same thing. It's the number one problem in family businesses that get themselves in a jam is that people get caught in, well, golly, I want to treat everybody the same, which is you take 100%, divide by the number of folks involved, and there's the number. Well, dividing a working asset is very different than dividing a capital asset like cash that's sitting in the bank. That's a pretty simple approach. So job one is recognize there's going to be tension, likely. And so don't make the assumption that this is going to be tension-free, because these are hard conversations. I think you lean into those conversations, though, from a place of candor and a place of care, so that you are, in fact, having that conversation with a long-term view. Recognize there are going to be family moments in every one of these conversations. There's going to be times you need to say, all right, everybody, we're going to do a 30-minute cooling off, or everybody go for a walk, or you go to that corner of the shop and you go to the barn, and then we're going to come back together in an hour when everybody's kind of recollected. And it's a long process. That's the problem. We get caught up in, I got to get this done today. Succession and estate planning is not a one-day event. It's a long process. So I'm hedging a little bit here, but simply to say is the first step is don't be afraid of the tension, because it's a tense conversation. And then recognize that in fair and equal, there is a division that can be worked out, but oftentimes the non-participating partners need to understand that they're going to get value at a discount. And discounted value is still a good deal. Cash in hand is better than debt risk. So when you're making those divisions, you need to be clear about that. And maybe at the very front end is the owners that have the entity in hand have to make a decision. What's the game they want to play? Is the goal to hand this business off? Is the goal to sell this business down the road? And then all the partners need to come together and say, okay, what's our individual vision, and then what's our shared vision for this entity? And if it's legacy and perpetuity, we're going to approach it very differently than if we're going to make this run as hard as we can for a decade and then we're going to sell. That's a different conversation.
One thing that I think about or encourage families to think about is land. So as a son who is going to inherit very little land compared to my friends and peers, I mean, in my close circle, my friends will all inherit much more land than I will. That's something that's deeply personal to me, that I want to change the family tree on that. And so I try to put myself in the shoes of an heir and say, is land important? And for some heirs, it might not be. Maybe they don't care about that. And for others, maybe even if it's 1 acre, the fact that it's land, that it's dirt, matters to them. And so they and maybe they don't care about the values, but they want, land as part of the family history, and they want an acre. I use that figuratively, but for me, I think that's an important, maybe even threshold question when the family starts to talk, is really learning what is everybody's motivations. And just because you might live in Chicago or New York City or Kansas City or wherever it be, Omaha, Lincoln, sometimes those emotional ties to our family's always owned land, and I want to be able to say to my friends, I own land. I think that's a threshold question that's worth exploring when you're sitting the family down to start talking about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, personally, so in full disclosure, I am a member of a family entity, and 3 of us, a ranch in western Colorado. I have a brother that lives in Boston, and for him, he initially wanted to be bought out when my dad passed away, and we started to set that up. And then he started thinking about legacy, and his goal oftentimes is to bring his friends from the east to the ranch so he can show them he's a real cowboy. And he's hopefully he's not listening to this because I'm about to tease him some. But he has a ton of fun with that, and it's like for him it is the non-financial equity that really does matter. I mean, in the short run, is that opportunity to stay tied to legacy. So I think that's an absolutely valid point that we need to be aware of. Like, what are you in the game for? Mm-hmm. And being clear about that's really important for families.
I resonate with that as well. So part of my story, and I'm laughing here a little bit because I actually called my brother yesterday and I said, hey, having this conversation with a group of individuals in the morning, if I happen to talk about a few things that involves us and the family farm, would that be okay? Because I didn't want to surprise him and get that phone call. And I got the thumbs up. But, similar to you, Tom. So actually my story started when I was at the University of Nebraska going to school here. I was an ag biz guy. And I ran into a financial planner, which was something that was honestly, it was a little bit non-existent connecting with those, back when I was in college. And he started asking me some questions. In fairness, I think he was trying to recruit me to be on his team. But we started that conversation about where is your family at? What are the things that they've talked about? And we talked about nothing at that point. We were just... It was my brother, myself, and my mom, and I had 3 sisters who were off the farm at that point already. So we were working full-time there, going to college, and it was just zero discussion. And by that time, my parents were, I think in their 50s or so, and it just wasn't something part of their radar. And so I actually went home. This is how this story started for us. And both of you talked about how talking or communication, it's the key. It's where it has to start, and it was not fun. My dad was certainly somebody that wanted to make right decisions and do right things, but it's very complicated. And there's a lot of dynamics there with any family, and there was with our family. When I started asking him about, hey, have you kind of started thinking about some of these things? There was a couple of years there. It was just like you didn't touch that football. But then he started opening up to it, and then it was a little bit of another journey with just being very real with my mom and having her kind of step into that a little bit, because you had to start talking about the details. And there's a whole, and we don't have to get into it all, but there was a whole process that took several years that we went through, and it wasn't because we were so smart. It happened, and I am so thankful it did, because there's maybe we'll get to it later. There's some things that happened the way it all kind of shelled out, if you will. Grateful that we were organized. Mm-hmm. So.
Looking forward to the next question. Before we get to that, though, Tom, back down to you. Your background is one of the most unique that I've heard. How you ended up now at a professor at the University of Nebraska Lincoln with your path. Tell us your path, though, and what's led you here.
It's not straight, I know that. And really, I'm not even sure it was fully intentional or planned, but grew up on a family ranch in western Colorado, got out of college, went back to that business, spent 5 years there. In the middle of the 80s, first loan, 17% interest. Thought I got the deal of the century. And ultimately went back to graduate school to learn really some tricks for our seed stock business, and ended up liking it. We were, in a period of time where probably made sense for somebody to start working elsewhere. And at that point in time, that was me. And sort of went down that path, I did some weird at Colorado State, started a family ranching business class, which there was no family management class at the university then. Started doing a lot of work with family entities in that stage, and then teach a family business management section here at UNL, work with young entrepreneurs, and then spend a lot of time with founders, who are trying to work through some of these things early so that they don't get caught in their 70s with no plan and a dysfunctional family. And I think the key thing that I've learned is don't sacrifice the family to save the business. Get your core right, and then the rest will take care of itself if you will just come to the table in good faith.
Unique background, like I said. Thanks for being here, Tom. And let's go to our next question. Luke is writing in from Kansas. He says, I work full-time with my dad and 2 brothers on our cow-calf operation, but lately every single decision turns into an argument. Feed equipment, branding, expansion, you name it. And it's starting to spill into family stuff. You just talked about that, Tom. Holidays, birthdays, there is tension everywhere. Craig, I want to come to you. He says, I don't want to tear the family apart over cattle, but I can't keep doing this. How do we fix our issues before it ruins both the farm and the family?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. And when you read through the list of things that he was talking about there, I think we just want to realize right away those are very superficial topics, right? The issue is really about communication and understanding each other. What is really going on? And I wish that individual was here, because there's a lot of questions that you would want to start digging into of when does the tension start to show up? Why is it showing up? And very often when it comes to families and teams in general, and Tom, we've talked about this before, there's generally 2 things at play. Communication's a big word, right? But communication is it's not so much about just being clear and having clarity, which is important. It's understanding that person sitting across the table from you, understanding what is it that fills their bucket. So you can understand part of the jobs that they love to do. You start to learn a bit how do they react based on their personalities, and again, this is a lot of footwork that in ag we don't do very well. We just go out and we do the work, because that's what needs to get done. You got to feed the cows, you got to pick the corn, you got to haul the grain, whatever. We don't spend a lot of time just sitting down and saying, hey, Spencer, I need to understand how you think a little bit. Now, we might naturally have some default opinions on that, but really digging into that will help begin to set a tone of when we're sitting down and having meetings as families, as teams. You can begin to understand where that person is coming from, why they're asking that question. Sometimes it's not about so much somebody, you may feel like that I'm disagreeing with you, but maybe it's because I'm just somebody that's trying to discern, if I can say it that way, get the context, understand the details so that I can make the best decision. It doesn't mean I don't want to agree with you right away on something, whatever that, issue might be. But if you understand that about me, you might be able to respond in a different way based on how I might ask questions, for example. So.
Luke said he's got 2 brothers, so 3 of them involved in this operation. Is that an opportunity perhaps to create, I've heard of some families doing this, divisions of an operation where each son can take the lead in a specific space? Is that an opportunity perhaps to try to create less tension?
Yeah. So growing up for me, one of the things that, again, I didn't know at the time, but as we worked, one of the things that I found out about our family is my dad was very much somebody who was a businessman as well as a hardworking farmer, but he could play both sides of the field, if you will, really well. And I really enjoyed the people side of it, no surprise. And it was very, common for me to join him, going to talk to the banker, the loan officers, the auctioneers, the whoever was involved, the hail insurance agent, like just because I was a people person. My brother, not so much. And we didn't quite, you just felt that tension a little bit, growing up as kids. But as we got older, we just understood he really enjoyed the mechanical, the structure, the part of just getting out and getting the work done. And I was the person that was like, if it involved people, send me, I'm there. So we started so as we grew older, we began to understand that, and you start taking different avenues of the business. What is it you enjoy? I enjoyed the finance and taking care of the loans and working with the lawyers. And he's like, I want to be out in the field, and I want want to do that work out there.
You enjoyed working with lawyers? That's the first I've heard somebody say that out loud.
I'm always saying it because Spencer's here.
You've got a unique background. At one point, you were a pastor. Now you're helping families and businesses overcome some challenges. What's your path been?
Yeah, so similar to Tom's, it's been crooked, but there's one main theme in it. And I grew up in a county where there was 800 people, and one thing that you'll find out about me is I'm a people person. A good day for me is sitting down around a table just like this, talking about hard issues, and maybe I could say it this way: hard and heart issues, if that makes sense. And so as I came down here to the university, got my ag biz degree, loved what I was doing, thought I'd always go back to the farm and ranch. As that unfolded, I ended up taking basically about 10 years and being in ministry full time as a pastor. Went on and did some schooling in that as well. And guess what? What I did there, it was about people again. It was sitting down with, in a counseling perspective, sitting down with people, walking through the hard stuff of life. It wasn't always hard. There was a lot of fun conversations there too, but working through the tough stuff. So we can't avoid those sort of things, but that's where I like to be, is helping people. And that's what really made me make that hard choice. It was probably the hardest decision I've ever made, was to quote unquote leave the farm. I had every opportunity to be there and was there and was part of it for several years. But I'm about people, and had the opportunity here to do that. And then that led to, I'm still involved with ministry now. I do a lot of work after hours, working with couples and individuals, dealing with difficult things again, and just trying to develop and grow and mentor people. But my day job is working with a company by the name of Prairie Fire. Work with a great group of guys, and we spend our time just working with different teams and organizations on organizational structure, culture, leadership development. And so those worlds interact real well for me in what I do. So.
We mentioned a few moments ago, tough stuff. And our next question is exactly that, dealing with something, excuse me, quite particularly tough. But first, reminder, you are joining us here on Surviving the Family Farm, a show just for farm and ranch families navigating those real life challenges. We want to hear from you, the questions you have, make you part of the show. So if you have a question you want to ask our panel of experts, go to ruralradio.com/ask. And we'd love to get in touch with you. Spencer, we're coming to you with this one. I'm going to keep the identity unknown. The title, though, here is Dad Wants a Prenup. My dad is telling me I have to have my fiance sign a prenup if I want to stay part of the family farm. I love my fiance, though, and we trust each other. This feels awkward and honestly a little hurtful. Dad says it's about protecting the farm, not the relationship. Is this normal? Our listener writes in, and how do we bring it up without damaging the relationship before we're even married?
Like any good lawyer, I'm going to punt to these guys on this. Abdicate liability. So I'll give a little context about what I see playing out, but I want this to be a discussion because I really am interested in the perspective from you gentlemen. I'll say growing up in a Catholic and still very active and practicing Catholic. The word prenup was something you would go running to the hills for. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to do it. I will say in the practice of law and at our firm, as the net worths of ag clients continue to grow, it's something that we're encouraging people to have a conversation about. Now, whether that's a prenup or some other tools, which I'm interested in your thoughts about, I think it's worth having a conversation about. Again, we're coming back to communication and conversation. What do we view this person's role in the operation, and what will their spouse's role be in the operation? And, how are we protecting the family legacy if something, if they get divorced on day one? Are they working right alongside us, or is it not? And so I think there's a lot of what ifs here. Before I say any more, I want to hear what you guys think about this. Yeah.
That's a tough one. I think oftentimes when somebody says, "Well, let's talk about an agreement around assets in advance of a marriage," a lot of people, their automatic assumption is, "Okay, well, we're just assuming that something's going to go wrong." I'm somebody that deeply believes that if you're going to get married, you better have had a lot of pretty deep conversations. Marriage should never occur in a vacuum. I teasingly say to my students all the time, do not choose to accept an invitation to marriage on the day when you're at your best, right? Or when your potential partner's at their best. You want to make sure you've seen them in their hardest time sometimes, because that helps you understand something about how a relationship's going to work. Depending on the business, depending on the complexity of the family, a premarital agreement may make some sense, but it's something that the family's got to sit down and they've got to talk about values, they've got to talk about mission and vision, and they've got to talk about how they're going to establish trust. And perhaps maybe in the early days, that maybe it's a rolling kind of deal. Like, we're going to put an agreement in place. You make it to year 5, and we start to change the tenets of it. But it's a hard conversation, but only if you haven't had the hard conversations. So if you've had those, sit down with potential in-laws. What's your expectation of me as a new member of this family, right? And sometimes I think my mom was probably so wanted me married off, she would have probably, she wasn't going to mention any expectations, right? They'll just take him. But I think that's critical, is before you get to the conversation about the legalities, what's the core? And too many people, I think, we're trying to be nice and we want to be liked, and so we don't ask those harder questions. And I think, a good premarital counselor does a good job of getting those questions on the table.
Let's go to somebody who does some of that premarital counseling.
The pressure is really
there.
on. So I was thinking about today, how am I going to have to put the pastor hat on today? And I got to be honest, this is one that it's a good conversation, and it's absolutely one that has to happen. But there are going to probably be some different ways that people handle this, just based on their faith background, if there is a faith background, because that does. I'm just going to be honest, that changes the game a little bit, because I think from a faith background, there's this. You were kind of hinting to it or joking about it, about prenuptial is a little bit. A hard thing to talk about, and there's some reasons for that. I think as you look at your values and your beliefs, there's this. I think God intended oneness that you want to bring into a marriage when two come together as one. We say that in marriage. What does that mean? As I'm just reflecting upon that question, and I think about there's kind of a sense of fear of what happens if, and you're trying to make decisions on what happens if, which is fear-based. And I never like that. I understand it and I get it. You try to set yourself in the seat of the parents who own the farm and the concerns, and rightly so, because you want to manage well what you have. And on the other side of it, there's this individual that's getting married, and there's this idea behind leave and cleave, and what does that mean in becoming one? And I'm being very pastoral here at the moment. So those are great discussions to have, and they need to happen with one another. What does that mean? What are they on the same page? Because there's certain things that, as a person of faith, that you may choose to go this route just based on that very fact, because as a believer or a person of faith, you're going to make these decisions based on your belief system, and you're going to go that route, and you're going to trust that you made that right decision because of what you believe. If you're, some that's not their background, and so then you're going to take a very much different route. And so you really need to, I think, to understand the family dynamics. You need to get people together, just as both of you've already said. What are the goals? What are the concerns? And what are people truly, and I have to be very transparent about this, what are we comfortable with stepping into? Because in my opinion, getting right down to the nuts and bolts of it, if we haven't come to some sort of a resolution through the tension, through the hard conversations where people are settled and feel like I'm very satisfied with this, we're probably going to be okay. But if we're not, it's going to be a burr under the saddle, so to speak, and it's going to show its ugly head at some point.
I was going to say, you'll hear me come back to this over and over and over again, which is these are multi-million-dollar businesses, and how would we run any other multi-million-dollar business? And if we're going to bring in a partner in this business, and so I think that's some of the foundational questions is spouse going to be a partner in this business? And if so, let's treat spouse like any other partner in this business. And if not, then maybe we use, premarital agreements are certainly one tool. Operating agreements in an entity structure, bylaws in a corporation, trust agreements where we say, here's when you can inherit and how the triggers for doing that. So there are other tools out there, but I think some of the foundation questions are, is this person going to be a partner here? And if so, then let's have the conversation like we're in business together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if as a senior generation, that is your expectation, communicate that very, very early. Like, everybody should know that prior to asking someone to marry them. They should know that this is an expectation in this family so that they can make an informed decision at that point. The real crisis is when the prenup shows up the day before the wedding. Oh, gosh, yes. Right? And I've seen that once, and that's not a good day for anyone. So if it's an expectation, get it clear, be prepared to explain the why behind it, because sometimes there's family history that simply there was 2 generations ago, there was a marriage that fell apart and it nearly destroys the business. And so people are, maybe leery based on experience, but early communication, again, I think we're going to beat that horse, right? Early communication over and over and over again. And every guy in Nebraska right now is going, oh, geez.
I think what's hard about it, though, and you're right, but the communication, but somebody has to take that first step forward and start that ball rolling. And it might be this lady here where she has to be the one to start that conversation, and that's not easy.
I was going to say, it can't be dad in this situation.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's tough.
All right, let's go to our final question of today's program. Megan in Missouri writes in, my husband and I have been running his family's farm for years. We pay the bills, improve the ground, update equipment, managing everything day to day. The family keeps saying the farm will be ours someday, but nothing is in writing. There's no will we've seen, no trust, no transfer plan. We're putting our lives into something we technically don't own, she says. And her question here, are we building a future or just working on borrowed time? And how do we push for that plan without causing a family blow up and everything they had built so far just being washed away?
This is not uncommon. And here's what I would say is that if you're in that situation, you haven't established boundaries and you haven't established a governance structure yet inside the business. And you can always go lovingly and firmly with a discussion around, here's what we're trying to figure out. We want to honor you. So if I'm the younger generation and that younger generation, I might be 60 and going to my 85-year-old parents or one of the surviving parents, I'm at this point in my life. I've got runway career-wise. I love this place. I love what we're doing here. But for me to continue, we need to get to an agreement about what happens, after you pass away. Now the challenge is people don't like to have the conversation based on when you pass away. We don't want to talk about our own demise very often. So one trick I've used is, what happens if you're abducted by aliens? Right? Because
trying to say something, Tom.
Yeah. So we give it this like it's a little less personal. That my end is going to come, which we all know inherently, but we as humans oftentimes we just want to not face it. But I think you have to, and it's not like I need to know by December 25th, but it's here's where I'm at. And here's the options I have, and here's the options you have. And there's 2 fundamental things that are super important. If you're coming back into a family business, your family does not owe you a job. They do not owe you a job. They do not owe you ownership. You have to earn it. Like if they wouldn't hire you because you're the best candidate, they probably shouldn't bring you back to the business. But as the founder, if I'm not clear about my expectations and my intent, I'm actually wounding my child and their family. And so both sides have to come to the table on this and recognize that it may be a challenging conversation, and it is not going to happen in a month. This might be, I don't know, a 2-year. And if you get in a jam, get your pastor involved. Get a trusted advisor involved, and get a team built, right? You need a good attorney. You need a great CPA. You need other family leaders that you trust who've been through the process. So build that team, and then you can work your way through this. But you've got to be clear about, clear and kind is way better than the hidden assumption or the hidden expectation that ultimately will blow a business up every time.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know all the facts here, but I think this goes back to learn and listen before making decisions. So one thing to learn and listen about the senior members of this family is, do they not want to talk about this because they don't like thinking about their own mortality, which as humans is certainly true, or do they not want to talk about this because they've got other heirs and they don't know how they're going to, what are they going to do for these other heirs, and what are they going to say to them if they say, yeah, you can take over the farm. And if that's the underlying, that could be the hurdle that needs solved. And so go find the support to solve that hurdle and help, mom or dad or grandma and grandpa, whoever it is, get a professional involved to help them, figure out how they're going to say to other heirs, this is what we've decided. This is the agreement we've come to. Here's what this looks like. Recently, I've been probably in the last month or 2 months or so here, been working on my own thoughts on this, but a big fan of the phrase, don't let perfect get in the way of good.
Yes.
And so I think, sometimes the proverbial alien ship, I'm going to steal this from Tom, the proverbial alien ship comes quicker than we might like or know. I sort of joke with clients, you only got to do your estate planning before you die. The thing is, the good Lord doesn't tell us when that day is going to be.
That's right.
And so I think it's super important that you get, yes, it's not going to happen by December 25th, but get something good in place and work on the perfect over the next 2-year period. Because if you just keep kicking the can until you get it perfect, sometimes that blows up in your face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely agree. I got to be honest, I kind of get the chills a little bit here just listening to this, because I didn't get abducted by aliens, Tom, but that was our family story. So shortly after, I'm kind of reflecting how we started this conversation after stepping into it with my family and dad and mom. We did not know at that time, just a few short years later, my dad would get cancer, my mom would get Alzheimer's, and we would lose them both in a fairly short amount of time. Now, short amount of time to me is 10, 15 years. But it shouldn't, that's not how you envisioned it going.
That's right.
And so in fairness, that's why I'm passionate about working and helping people in this space, because you can't and you shouldn't. It's a leadership issue, which is a little bit foreign again, I think, to us in the ag world. When we talk about, we all know what leadership is, but what does that look like when it comes to family situations and thinking about transition and thinking about ownership? We do need to dive into that, and the best way to do it is start rubbing shoulders with everybody that we've talked about, from your CPA to your family lawyer to your financial planner and to those that counsel you and provide wisdom. Otherwise, everything gets emotional. We never generally make good decisions when we're leading with emotions first and at that last minute. So.
All right, I want to sneak in one question, even though I said that was our final. I wanted to follow up, though. You talked about the timeline, not setting a hard date, but in general, on a family farm, somebody's setting up their transition succession plan. How long of a runway do you give for that conversation? Perhaps back to you, Tom.
Well, it's going to be unique to the family at some level. Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The key thing is what, in our family, what got my dad off the dime is my brothers and I sat him down and we said, Dad, you've worked this hard to build this business. Do you want to decide what happens, or do you want the county attorney you don't like to decide? And the next day we were in the process. And we ended up with a great, and to your point, my dad died unexpectedly about a year after we had that finished up, and the business operated smoothly. It was not without pain and loss, but we all knew what to do, and we were able to keep the business going and honor my dad's legacy because we'd gotten past that hurdle. So I think figure out the trigger to get the conversation started, and Spencer's absolutely right. You're never going to have a perfect plan. Get a good one, and then communicate.
And Craig, on that note of communication, what's the number one hurdle you see in a lack of communication? I guess that is the hurdle, but what is the biggest challenge in communication for farm families today?
You know, we make time in our schedules, again, for everything on the farm. Feeding the cows, it could be going to church, it could be, going to the football games and all those things. We make time for those, but what we don't make a priority is sitting down with our family or whoever's involved with that operation and saying, okay, we're gonna place a value on understanding each other so that we can have meaningful, authentic, transparent, real conversations. Not every conversation is hard, but you have to understand when these multi-million-dollar businesses, it's challenging, it's difficult. There's good times, there's hard times, there's hailstorms, there's, everything in between. And you have to be able to sit down with one another and talk about the hard stuff. And that is the learning and the listening. I need to know who's sitting across. I mean, even though we might have been raised together, as a family, it doesn't mean that, like in my example, that my brother and I actually understood how we were wired and how we were different. We just kind of went out and did chores together, so to speak. But there were some big differences that now we talk about in different ways, and because we've learned some tools. I like to call them. I think every family needs like that 9/16 when it comes to communication. Everything on the farm needs like a 9/16, so we always carried 2 or 3 of them around. And I think when it comes to communication, you need to dive into that and learn some tools when it comes to communication of how to do it well with one another. It'll go so much easier. Not that there won't be tension in hard times, but it will go be more effective.
And Spencer, what's the number one thing you wish people would have talked about before a lawyer like yourself gets involved in a conversation?
That's a great question. I'm going to shoot from the hip on this and say that I think it's probably our jobs are a lot easier to explain what are the tools in the toolbox and is the 9/16 right for your family, or does your family need a 1/2 inch for the, So it's our jobs are much easier to explain the breadth of the tools and which one do we want to use for this situation if the family's in a spot that they understand what is everybody's motivations. I'm working with a couple families right now, and to come back to that land thing, mom and dad are sitting around the table saying, do we divide assets? How do we divide? We've got an on operational heir, and a couple of non-operational heirs. Do we divide equally? How do we do this? And for me, the job would be a lot easier if I knew, has the family talked about, does each child want some piece of land? And if the answer to that is yes, we'll pull out a tool and design it so that everybody gets land and the operational heir gets to keep operating it. If others don't care about the land, that's not the right tool. So we figure out, what is. And so I think that we're coming up on the holiday. I'm not sure when this is going to air. We're coming up on the holiday season here. The holidays are not the time to talk about what vaccine are we going to give at branding this year, or what vet are we going to use, and make those decisions in the weeds. They are times, I think, to talk about, Craig, what's important to you and your family? Tom, what's important to you, and do you envision your kids would care about this place, and or is that not important to you? And I think those are times where you can listen and learn about your family members, about what's important to them. Craig, do you like talking about this stuff when we're feeding cattle, or would you prefer that we talked about it over the noon hour? So people prefer to talk about these things at different times, and this is a time to listen and learn. So.
It really comes down to those two things of vision and strategy. Like, again, in the corporate world, in the business world, we naturally have those meetings and those times. We don't do that well on the farm.
Yeah.
It's not in most people's calendar. Do you have that once a year, twice a year? What's going well? What's not going well? Very easy, natural discussions to have to bring up exactly those sort of things. You know, what is it that you love doing on the farm? What are those things that you don't enjoy at all doing on the farm? What are those things that fill your bucket? What are those things that really suck the energy out of you? They're actually very enjoyable conversations to have.
And men are so terrible about asking these questions. Let mom ask them, or spouse ask the question, and men grab your cup of coffee and lean against the kitchen counter and listen to the answer.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it comes down to figuring out what game are you in as a business. Is this a finite game? Is it an infinite game where the goal is to stay in the game as long as possible? What are our expectations? And ultimately, it comes down to governance and roles and responsibilities. And if we're in a power struggle, we don't ever do that well. And so having the conversations are really important. Having them in the right place is important. Neutral ground can be really good. That way we're not battling over whose table it is that we're having the conversation at. And there are tools, and these are hard things. They're challenging things. And so if we're putting a new transmission into a vehicle and we don't know how to do it, we're probably going to go get a mechanic, right? So if I'm trying to put a new transmission under my family business and I need a mechanic, let's go get the mechanic. I'm still in control, but now I've got the expertise and the perspective and the insight from somebody else who can help guide us and who can ask the hard question, because they're not coming to Christmas dinner anyway, right? And so, we'll use a mechanic, we'll use a veterinarian. Why wouldn't we use all the tools available to us to make our family business better, give us a better shot at legacy, and to create a family unit that honors our past and opens the door for our future?
Dr. Tom Field, Craig Birdside, Spencer Hartman joining us here on Surviving the Family Farm. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. I want to remind you, we'd love to have you be part of the show, get your question, perhaps even have you join us here on the broadcast. If you have a question, go to ruralradio.com/ask and we'll get in touch with you. Again, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. And if you enjoyed the show, be sure to share it with a friend. We'll see you next time.